Hi, it's August the 31st, the final day, the final Thursday before Labor Day, and I guess the official start of fall and all the work and stuff that goes with it. And it's THCB gang. I'm Matthew Holt, your host. Because it's one of those weeks and everyone else is off at Burning Man or wherever they are, or in the Hamptons. We're very small, a small but mighty lineup today. Two of my favorites, Michael Millenson, President of Health Quality Advisors in Chicago, and Kim Bellard, writer and regular THC contributor from Cincinnati. So, gents, we are, it's at that point of the summer where, almost everybody's given up on everything. And the saddest thing that happened this week is that one of the San Francisco Giants had a no-hitter until the final batter of the ninth inning and gave up a hit. So, yeah, so sad stuff. But there has been some stuff happening in healthcare. Michael, I saw you wrote a fancy article in Forbes. Kim, you wrote some stuff on THCB, and I have been. I will chastise all of you about influence in healthcare in a second, but I suspect one of you will mention drugs somewhere in all of this, and maybe not the drugs that were or were not being used in the World Athletics Championships last week, which I watched, but no one else in America watches.
I watched.
Oh, you watched it too. And the Americans did very well, so I don't know why no one in America watches. But anyway, Michael, why don't I start with you? What have you been up to? What have you been looking at? What do you care about? What do you have to say?
I looked at the CMS report on ACOs, which tried to chirp with optimism, but basically showed that the number of ACOs has dropped 20% since 2018 peak, and that the amount of money they save Medicare was 1.8 billion, which I guess is maybe enough to get you a hall pass in the CMS hallway, but isn't really a whole lot of money. And then I wrote a
that'll cover like a week or two's Ozempic bill for Medicare, right?
Yeah, right. 1.8 billion doesn't even get a drug company to knock on your door. So I compared it to Medicare Advantage, which of course has boomed. And the difference really is that Medicare Advantage had a Republican Congress, which renamed it Medicare Advantage and gave it a very generous reimbursement rate. Because they were going to be wonderful to the private sector. And ACOs were invented by an academic at Dartmouth, and all the regulations were written by bureaucrats, and they don't make much money. And when you don't make much money, people don't flock to you. So I ended my column with one of my favorite sayings, which endears me to physicians: grab them by the wallet and their hearts and minds will follow. And thus far, hearts and minds have not followed ACOs, however idealistic the ACO movement might be.
So isn't this, and you guys know this, the Medicare shared savings programs is separate from the ACO, right?
No. Medicare shared savings program is one type of ACO. Then they had another type of ACO, which was for doctors and for people in disadvantaged areas who couldn't afford really to ante up the money to start an ACO. They gave them some money to do that. And now they started a new type of ACO, which was direct contracting. They called it ACO Reach.
Right.
A bunch of private equity people got interested in it, which totally flummoxed all the progressives, because even though the idea was to help equity and help rural people, if the private equity people were interested in it, it must be terrible.
That's a different kind of equity.
Different kind of equity. although I believe that if we, maybe we should take something from Jonathan Swift and we should sell poor people to private equity. We just sort of eliminate.
We call it privatizing prisons.
That's right.
And immigration detention centers and a bunch of others as well. Yeah.
Right. So the ACO has so many different kind of flavors, and it's sad because in some ways it's a great idea. If you step back, the ACOs by law put providers in charge. Doctors and hospitals have to have 51%. Now they do things with insurers or doing the administrative, but it puts doctors and hospitals in charge. Medicare Advantage is those evil insurers. And what happens? Turns out the evil insurers beat the saintly doctors and hospitals out of all all comers. Now, there's a lot of reasons for that, most of which is that CMS rules were so bureaucratic that the best doctor and hospital groups who were already providing efficient care looked at the rules and said, we're not going to do this. But the biggest reason is that if you're in Medicare Advantage, you can make lots and lots of money. And if you're in ACOs, you can't. And so as soon as we come up with health reform that allows people to make oodles of money, we'll have health reform. And that's
Well, I think we already had that. I mean, there's decent, now you can argue back and forth that within, you know, as you said, health reform, Medicare Modernization Act 2003, that was which brought in, you know,
Right.
part use of drugs, that brought in, that really changed the fortunes of Medicare. You know, people, private health plans were getting out of Medicare risk as it was then, obviously, because the payments had gone down. Then they went back up. That also changed it so that you could now, you got paid for taking on risk, not paid for avoiding risk. And obviously the games that have been played over the last, and all the arguments between George Alderson and, you know,
John Berwick and all
Berwick
those
and Rick have been around. You know, how's that really gone? We know that there's a lot of interest in doing that. We know that there was a lot of stuff that was done poorly in Medicare fee for service, but we also know that you know, as Jeff Gossip would be saying if he was on now, overall healthcare costs as a share of GDP haven't gone up for the last decade. It's been fairly flat. So you could argue maybe the ACA and Obamacare actually worked. And in fact, if I remember rightly, Obama wrote an article in the New England Journal of Medicine, which explained how he had, you know, he said we were going to save $2,000 per person. He explained how he had saved $2,000 per person because the price of healthcare had not gone up at the previous rate it had done. And had it gone up at the previous rate, it would have been $2,000 per person more.
and all those Republican think tanks that predicted the bankruptcy of everything, I've not yet to see the I'm sorry. Right.
Well, on the other hand, it could be pointed out that we haven't had a good recession. I mean, obviously we had the minor swift reversal in 2020 because of COVID, but post 2009, we've been coming out of that recession. There's been almost free monetary policy, you know, with the ZIRP, the zero interest rate program, for basically a decade and a half, and somehow we've still avoided the recession post the interest rates going back up with the inflation post-COVID.
It's fair to say that they've been helped by macroeconomic trends.
Yeah.
Absolutely. But it's also fair when you put that aside. Remember, this was going to be a disaster for small businesses. Is that right? I mean, it was going to be a disaster for MA, Medicare Advantage, right? And so you may be more successful because the wind was at your back, but when you were predicted to be, you know, an all-out disaster, you can't say that was safe. It was safe because they were wrong.
I would argue that the ACA, you know, in the end, and I think James Haneke wrote this at the time on THCB, you know, it was a relatively modest reform, right? It was a reform around the edges of how we sell individual health insurance, essentially, and then we put some stuff and some subsidies in place. They went away, they came back with this. Right. But it's a bit like saying the president of the United States is responsible for inflation when the president of the United States doesn't even control taxation or interest rates. Well, what the hell? Why is it Biden's inflation fault that inflation goes up and inflation goes down? I don't know.
But Matthew, you're a self-employed guy in Silicon Valley. The most important thing it did was it gave us the marketplace and freed you from being locked into an employer. And that.
Right. Had I had an employer, I agree. Although I'm these days, I'm now ticked up. You do notice the marketplace allows you to charge by age, and unlike a couple of you who are now, you know, Frederick Hayek slaves to the system because you're on Medicare, I have to provide my own insurance. It's very expensive when you're 60, so I'm looking forward to becoming going back into finding paid employment if anybody will have me. Anybody listening? Let me.
Right, but at least it freed up the entrepreneurial spirit of the American entrepreneur,
which was lacking terribly before. Actually, I do agree. It is ridiculous that you have to think about your literally. So and I'll get to you in a minute, Kim, I promise. But one of the things I've been doing
made early retirement feasible as well.
Well, that's true as well. I mean, bizarrely, actually. Let me finish this point and then I'll get to Kim. So there's more stuff going back to. So this just last week, and then this week and last week. So I've just started in my new most important role, which is as adjunct professor at the University of San Francisco, which is not UC San Francisco, the famous one. This is a small private Catholic university on the west side of town, which has it's a good little private university, and it has a graduate school of nursing, which has a health informatics program, and a very small and select group, like about 15 of those students, take a class in something called digital health entrepreneurship. And because I know the guy who runs the whole thing, I've been drafted in as adjunct professor. So this morning, they literally had a whole session on all the benefits you can get as an adjunct professor. And the answer is they're not much. But if you teach enough, they start to trickle in. If you teach more than, I think it's 12, I think I'm doing 12, I have to do 12 units for over a period of a year. I've only obviously just started, but I think I'm doing 8 units a term in this course I'm teaching, I believe. It might be 4, I can't remember how many. If I do enough units as an adjunct professor, I can qualify for their plan, which is they have a plan, which is the Kaiser only plan, but that's fine. And I may end up doing that, right? And but one of the things I have to do is I have to earn enough money to be able to afford to pay the premium. So essentially, I literally could have a job, which is just to get me health insurance. There was a bunch of other stuff involved, including the city of San Francisco. If you work enough hours, 8 hours a week, actually taxes the employer $3 an hour. And that goes into a fund that the employee can apply to use to pay for out-of-pocket healthcare expenses.
Wow.
Who knew about that? But that exciting. I'm learning more and more stuff about health benefits every day, even though I've been doing this for the years I've been doing this. Anyway.
So, Matthew, today is my very last day as an adjunct associate professor of medicine at the Feinberg School of Medicine of Northwestern University.
You've finally been fired?
I was fired after 30 years of adjunct status at Northwestern, first at the Center for Health Services and Policy Research, then the Kellogg School of Management, last 5 or 6 years at the medical school. I have not had my adjunct status renewed, alas.
Were you?
Are they going to make you dean or something?
Were you teaching? Were you actively teaching? Or have you just been using the city?
Well, here's the problem. They had a new dean of the medical school who said, we're not going to renew your adjunct status unless you teach or bring in research money. I can't bring in research money because the rules say as an adjunct, you can't be a principal investigator. And they wouldn't let me teach because I'm not a PhD.
Oh, that's a high class university.
And so
they'll let anybody.
Last year, I worked with some students who were interested in informatics and actually a woman who was doing something on abortion, all this. So I did some work with students, and that interest group I didn't do work with. And so I was kind of put in this catch-22 where we won't let you teach, and we won't let you bring in money. And therefore, how come you're not doing what we need you to do? Well, okay. So
were they giving you money for not teaching and not bringing you money, or was it purely?
They were not giving me any money. I was not getting any benefits. I would do research and give them the status and write articles and all the rest of that for the research literature. But I'm going to be in a National Academy of Medicine work group on investment in the economy for healthcare and reforming healthcare and all the rest of that. Doesn't matter. So they don't care about what you're doing unless you're doing the other things. And so, unfortunately, I neglected to order a PhD by mail for $100 when I could have. Your
shining academic career is coming to an end.
My shining academic career after 30 years of academia adjunctness has come to an end.
I suspect that after this podcast, you guys are going to be flooded with offers from other places that would make you guys adjunct professors somewhere.
Okay. All right, Kim, we haven't got to you at all. That we managed to get 15 minutes of bullshit so far. So
I know we're going to talk about it a little bit, so I'll pass on that. The topic I wanted to mention was there are 2 studies in JAMA Surgery this week that indicated that female surgeons have better outcomes than male surgeons. And there is a long history of other studies like this. I wrote about it several years ago. They have better mortality rates, lower complication rates, whether you measure 30, 60, whatever. And, people are saying like, it's not because they're female, it's because of how the female, they speculate it's because of how the female surgeons interact with their patients and, talk to them and all that kind of stuff. And, I just thought it was interesting that, so we know that other studies indicate that female patients do worse and female doctors do better. So one way or the other, women continue to get screwed in healthcare. Someone described it as it's the glass ceiling in medicine. Like the women can't cut a break any way you look at it. But I hope people are looking at these studies and saying, well, what does that tell us and what does that mean? Like doctors, one of the studies showed that the doctors were much faster, but they had more complications. And I guess they don't care because if they're faster, of course, they can do more surgeries and, make more money. So,
and the complications was the patient's fault anyway, Kim.
Yeah. So this is kind of something, Michael.
I saw the study, but there are other studies on surgery. I know there's studies on primary care that say that there's other studies in surgery.
Yeah, in the same one, there was one in Scandinavia as well. They talked about it.
Scandinavia. Right, I saw that.
So the one study was US and Canada, the second study was in Scandinavia.
But you mentioned that you'd written about other ones. Were there other previous ones on surgery? I hadn't seen that.
Yeah, it was something with heart surgeries like in 2017.
Huh, interesting.
So a while ago, there was a pretty big study that said that younger surgeons were much better, and that as you lost, it's a bit like athletics. If you get, I mean, at some point we have to be trained to get experience, but at some point, I think they were comparing the people in the late 30s to the late 40s to the late 50s, and the decline was pretty steep there. Which is interesting because you'd assume that there'd be some benefit of longer term experience in seeing more stuff, but maybe by the time you've seen whatever the first 200 or 500 is, it's good enough, and then youth is better than.
Some doctor told me years ago that you want a doctor 10 years out of medical school. Before that, he doesn't know enough. After that, he's forgotten too much stuff and hasn't learned the new stuff. So 10 years is apparently the sweet spot.
You have to keep changing your doctor every year. Then I always think you want a primary care doctor who's younger enough than you.
I really say you want to practice a group out with one of his youngest old. So Kim, you remind me this week, as I may have mentioned before, I've been working for over 2 years on a project to take some of the data in surgery and have guys who are sports experts look at that and see if they can come up with new measures, right? And when I took this to the data companies, they said, that's a great idea, except anything you can think of, we can think of. So we don't need you to think outside the box because you can't think of anything we can't think of inside the box. Anyway, still working on this. And one of the doctors who inspired me, I saw him, he was recording his arthroscopic surgeries back in the late 80s. And I decided to look him up online. The guy is still around. He's 90 years old, doesn't do surgery anymore. So I called him up. I emailed him and I connected with him on the phone. And he said, well, how long were you videoing your surgeries? And he said, well, I did it till I stopped practice in 1996. I said, oh, okay. And when did you start doing it? The 1970s. The 1970s. And when I visited him, he had in his office, this was like in the late 80s, using Microsoft Word, an interactive kind of thing where you could print out your medical record for the patients when they checked in. And I said, well, you recorded it for all those years? He said, yeah, and I would review it in order to get better. All that, and at the beginning, I taught myself arthroscopic procedures. I reviewed it. He says, and actually, this goes to your point, Kim, and that's why I stopped practice when I was 62 in 1996. And what do you mean? So, well, I was reviewing the videos and I saw how much more effort it took me to produce the results that I wanted. And so I retired. And he said, you know what? I told Blue Cross Blue Shield of Michigan that if they would just put back, years ago, if they would just put video and sound inside and outside every surgical suite and require the surgeons to send in the videos to a warehouse, they wouldn't even have to look at it. Surgery rates would drop 50%.
Yeah, but the malpractice companies would go crazy. Like, yeah. Be recorded.
Right. And
there's a lot of technologies now where they are starting to record them, a bunch of companies could raise money to do that. I'll bring my dad in here, right? Because he was a gynecologist and he operated, he always, claimed what a great gynecologist he was. And I'm sure he was around as a great surgeon himself. He's the one who saved the ectopic pregnancy, which I think I mentioned on this show before, which I always say is how they should do. The story goes there was an ectopic pregnancy, and somehow in the 70s it got to full term, and the baby was not in the uterus, the baby was in the belly. Somehow the baby was alive, the mother was alive, so he cuts in. There's a baby, but he can't find the uterus, and there's blood everywhere. I think the patient went through 12 or 14 pints of blood, all the blood they had of her type in the hospital. And in the end, she lived, and the baby lived, and that was pretty remarkable. And when was it the Indiana or was it the Ohio Republican, House member or
Ohio,
where the guy said, if you have an ectopic pregnancy, you still have to carry it to term. I said that's completely fine so long as my father is around to do the delivery. And given he's been dead for 5 years, it might be a bit tricky. But when he was, I do recall. I mean, I think there's a lot going on in terms of So that particular guy, Michael, I mean, incredibly wants to stop doing something because he felt that the evidence showed he wasn't doing it as well. I know for sure. My dad, he was forced to retire at 65. Actually, one of his younger colleagues had to have his hip replaced in his 50s. And he took over, I think he was 68 or 69 at that point, and he took over that colleague's duties for, I don't think he didn't need very complicated stuff, but he did all the simple surgery for about 6 months or so, just because he was bored and he liked doing it. He went back to do it again, and apparently it was fine, but clearly after that, when he went back again, I mean, I could tell that he, his status and what he was doing, what he was interested in, now he had to go retire. He went on cruises and he did this and he did that and the other. But I mean, clearly it wasn't as much, it wasn't him, he lost a lot of his identity and what he was doing. And I think that's a problem that many of us will face as the years accelerate. But I mean, those of us who sit around writing and talking for a living, that there's less how do I say, there's less critical pressure on our performance, perhaps. If Kim writes an article, it's not that great.
You mean if we stop making sense, then nothing happens?
If we stop making sense, I don't think anyone's going to suffer as a consequence other than the people who have to put up with the stuff that implies that we made sense in the first place, which is
Michael, your comment about sports reminded me that, about 10 years ago, a guy told me that we know everything about every major sports person that we know about any doctor.
Oh,
that's right.
But to be clear, they're much more important because there's only 400 or 500 major sports.
So the implication of that to me is it's clear what the solution is. We need to have betting on surgery.
Right.
If there were betting, there would be data, and people would track this stuff.
Then you run into the problem.
We need public betting as opposed to just the patient betting their life.
We end up with the problem they're now having in British soccer, where 2 or 3 players have been banned for betting on their own games. There's this type style.
Rose problem.
But and it's unclear. And the other thing that's going on there is that soccer has caught up with baseball is very easy to do the analytics, but soccer, which is the big sport of the world, has caught up with this now, and there's now ton of analytics about how many passes a guy completed and how many so there's a lot of sort of money ball analytics of soccer players with video at each one and all. So the back in the old days, the old lazy winger would trope back and leave not cover back, and now if he gets busted, he'll be busted on match of the day for not doing that, so now it's tight. But like I said, there's all this now, there's betting, and there's betting on crazy stuff like how many yellow cards did somebody get, or how many when was that. So little things, a bit like point shaving in basketball, where you could do something that wouldn't impact the game, you could do something that would impact the betting. And so there's a lot of suspicion about doing it. But so that bet, would surgeons be able to bet on themselves to kill the patient? Then you get all kinds of moral requirements. What's our percentage? My percentage mortality rate went up a few bit this month, and I made some money on the back end.
I think Kim gave us they can bet on how many patients they can go through. The male surgeons can bet on speed. Get him out of here. Get him out. I know he's bleeding. Come on, next, you can bet. Excuse me, efficiency. That would be the measure. How many on throughput, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that's also, so I actually I'll bring in 2 more things from the class I've been teaching, because it is a group of graduate students who are all working professionals, right? They're all late 20s, early 30s kind of, and then nurses, technicians, a couple of physical therapists, a number of physicians, mostly overseas physicians, international students, because I'm sure they're good for the economy of the university at least, right? And it's really fascinating, talking with them about what they know, what they don't know. And I thought there were 2 things that are one of the things we're doing is we're reading Eric Topol's book, which I hadn't read before. I'd read all his previous ones. I hadn't read the one on artificial intelligence, which was written 4 years ago. So it's staggeringly out of date, but also very interesting. And one of the things I thought was very interesting is that he was predicting the rise of AI as a way to bring back empathy and communication to medicine. Partly, of course, because computerized medical records and the pressure on people to get through patients, whether in surgery or more likely in their office, was ramping up the inability for patients for people to getting in the way of sort of empathetic communication. And you're saying that if technology worked well, it should help support the clinician get that out of the way. And just this past week, I've seen a couple of examples of really interesting stuff in sort of AI-based stuff that seems to be pointing in that direction. So I've seen one company which was starting to and this is like baby steps. They're well, one of one's further than baby steps. First one was baby steps. It was like predicting sepsis, and it was a professor of some kind of analytics sitting medical school figuring it out. But the sepsis prediction with the AI was really helping get much, and I know Epic's had a system done this for a while, but it was really using live signals from the EMR and stuff put in and looking at the notes and what have you, and was getting decisions much more quickly in the process, hours, certainly 2 to 3 hours rather than 8 to 10 hours or whatever the normal rate is, and was having really good impacts on things like both on preventing sepsis, accelerating in the inpatient facility, and identifying sepsis in the emergency room. And I was unaware that apparently 70% of admissions for sepsis are outpatient or emergency room admissions. People go home and they develop it post-surgery or whatever, or they get it in a nursing home or whatever. And so that's very important. Can you spot it as quickly as possible, given what you know about the patient walking in? So the other, and that's, I think that you'd imagine would help, with better information would help, and you wouldn't have to do so much questioning of the patient and that kind of stuff. The other thing, which I thought was really very smart, which is the company called Abridge.io. I don't know if you run into these guys, Michael. They are doing like Nuance and some of the Suki and some of those. They're doing this ambient recording.
Right.
So now I use this for my own primary care visit. 2019, 2018, when they came out, I downloaded. They sent me a early beta. I downloaded. I took it, and it really wasn't very helpful, because imagine recording this conversation, trying to get the useful stuff out of it. you'd have to cut through a lot of our bullshit, right, to figure out what.
It'd be a verbatim transcript.
Sorry.
It'd be a verbatim transcript. Everything's useful, right?
Of course it would be, Kim. Yes, of course. But essentially, the CEO took me through an encounter where, we were doing a fake encounter together, but it was perfect, and it cut out a lot of crap. It changed.
Wow.
He was deliberately trying to sell it dummies, as they say in rugby or soccer, and it was really smart, and it's kind of obviously akin to the improvement in things like ChatGPT and other types of AI over the years, and you can see how much better that's getting, and I think very soon we'll be at the point now where people won't be typing notes; they'll just be talking.
I've seen some studies that show that people are using it for notes, real time almost. So yes.
Yeah. My impression. Well, I mean, Epic has got a deal going with Microsoft to use ChatGPT. I thought it was more to read the notes than to create them. But they also own Nuance. Microsoft owns Nuance, which is a competitor. And then these guys at Bridge have got they are the new. This is quite Epic as a new system. They used to have this Epic App Orchard, which was kind of their app store, and they've closed that, and they have a thing called Partners and Pals. I think if you're a pal, you're not quite up there with a partner, but a Bridge is a pal. For whatever that means. So I think it means that Epic's at least said, yeah, it'll work with us.
Wait. Partners and pals, not subjects and objects? Matthew, when you mentioned the sepsis thing, with you and Kim talking about betting, all I can think of is, you know what? I'm going to get the bet down on how many sepsis cases our hospital is going to have in the next day, a couple hours before everyone else.
You're going to play the over-under. You're playing the over-under with advanced inside information.
That's exactly. What's the over-under on sepsis?
If Rudy Giuliani wasn't busy, he'd be coming by your trading desk and arresting you. That's the 1986 Rudy Giuliani, not the 2023 Rudy Giuliani.
There was actually an obit in today's Chicago Tribune, which was like a written obit, not like a paid journalist, so I didn't know, but I was looking at it, and it said about the 6th paragraph that she died from a cut that became septic. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And they named the hospital. which is just really, really unusual. It's pretty, and it does that to people. It's just something that looks innocuous.
Well, I had a very interesting conversation this week about it was about sexually transmitted diseases with a person who runs a company that does that. I was talking some very disturbing things about the rate of various STIs now post PrEP. So PrEP is now taken obviously frequently by men who have sex with men, and means they don't have to worry about condom use in general in terms of catching HIV. But a lot of other stuff is now going around and getting worse. And in some groups it's getting worse. And then, like many other drugs, if they forget to take their PrEP, the likelihood of actually catching HIV exceeds those people who don't take PrEP, which was there was some quite amazing. There's some quite amazing conversations in this, quite amazing stats that the guy I was talking to had about this, and one of the interesting things was that he was very nervous about he's very nervous about the sort of whole move of the Biden administration and CMS to discuss health equity, because he felt that the more you talk about, well, these are perhaps underprivileged or minorities or whatever who are, or LGBTQ people who are that you're going to lose the backing of mainstream America, especially the Republicans, come back in for them. So his thing is not to talk about that at all, but to talk about their huge cost on the healthcare system if they get it wrong, and therefore how you should be doing better sexual health and better management of this to come. And it's just as a cost savings measure only, just couching it purely in kind of good fashioned old style Republican rather than Trump style Republican terms. But he did say that Gilead is going to come out with a once every 6 month injectable version of PrEP, which he says he thinks that will actually, if we can get enough, if we can get everyone on it, somewhat akin to the Hep C drug, we should be able to eliminate HIV in relatively short order in a number of years. So there was some interesting tidbits. But I did want to turn us to one other thing, which is semi more serious. But I put out a tweet. There was a bunch of tweets around asking people to vote for certain people in the modern healthcare most influential 150 people. And there's a massive long list you can go look at, the people who've been nominated, of several hundred. And of course, all the people who either are venture capital connected or have good PR agencies or whatever have tweeted out or pinged me directly or whatever, saying, hey, please come vote for me, right? Or please vote for these people we invested in or whatever. And I looked down the list, and it was and there are people on the list. There is one person from Bain Private Equity. There is Joe Biden on the list. There's a bunch of people who run healthcare systems and Jim Madera at the AMA. There are a bunch of people on the list who I think are sort of healthcare heavyweights who do have a lot of influence. And there's a ton of people who are like CEOs or chief medical officers of startups, or even fairly very well funded startups. And I was kind of thinking, are these people the most influential in healthcare? How? So I picked on one, which was Devoted Health, which is Todd and Ed Park, who great guys, very, very well funded Medicare Advantage plan. But the last I heard, it had like 200,000 members. So I don't know how influential you can be for all of American healthcare if you're running an organization that has, what is it, one, I can't do the math, but a hell of a lot less to United than Humana have got. So I was wondering who we thought the most influential one was. Going back to the pals and partners piece, I didn't notice Judy Faulkner from Epic being on the list, and I would have thought she should be up there. So I'll ask you guys, who do you think are the most influential people in American healthcare?
Besides yourself, I'm assuming.
Somehow, I hate to say this, and I hate to break it to all of us, including myself, I don't think any of the three of us make the top 100. Michael's looking ashen-faced at me as though I've been, called his dog ugly or something.
The whole thing is, this makes the U.S. News and World Report outcome stuff look like
look legit, yeah.
I mean, look, I've been looking at their list for years. First of all, 100 or 150 influential people, really? If you're 100, does that really make you influential? Secondly, I mean, why is there voting on this, right? We all know the president of the United States, let's do I mean, if you want to do this and actually try to do something, take the government people out of it, right? Because that's not even a vote, right?
Except for the VA.
Well, hang on, but somebody somewhere in the government decided that the ending of the start of the public health emergency and the ending of the public health emergency resulted in several million people going on or off Medicaid. That, to me, that's influential.
Right, but
where did that decision get made?
But you have the government people, right? I mean, anybody who's making a decision with CMS controls how many hundreds of billions of dollars, right? So nobody else compares to that. So you take and
I'm taking about, but they're the ones who should be the top of the list.
If you want to actually look who is influential besides the obvious, that would be useful, right? Who in the private sector is influential? So you take away, the chair of the House Ways and Means Committee or whatever, you take away the people who, whatever, the Supreme Court, whatever the hell you want to do, right? Take away.
So Alito was not on it. And I would have said he's been,
that's what I'm saying.
Maybe not this year, but last year, he was the most influential guy.
The voting for that is dumb because whatever people say, we know that's the stuff. Now, look at the private sector and go, who is influential there? That would be pretty interesting. That would be really it. So, for instance, Tom Scully was written up by some places, right? Former Federation of American Hospitals, former head of CMS, former advisor to Bush II, right? And now a lobbyist and a private equity guy. Well, this Judy Faulkner, who most people haven't heard, right? So if you start to look at private sector people, that would be pretty interesting because then it's not just what their title is in the government. It's, what do they do that really changes healthcare that maybe is not as obvious as, being president of the United States. So that would be kind of interesting. And I'm sorry to say that you would not make the list along with Judy Faulkner. No offense.
My contribution on Twitter was to say, who was it at Novo Nordisk and decided to price their Ozempic and Mounjaro at the price they did, right? That's pretty, that's it. That may be a $200 to $300 billion influential decision that was made at some point.
The interesting thing I think would be, so it's easy to, the CEO of United Healthcare, the drug companies, the people who are most likely to continue things the way they are, but more so, I'm not really interested in it. The interesting thing would be so who's working on stuff that could really change stuff? So what was the Uber CEO's name? Travis, whatever his name is, who are the people that are doing something that if they succeed would change everything dramatically? That's the list I would like to see.
Yeah.
Well, so to be fair to then the people who've been pimping to me and pimping on Twitter or whatever, that is the sort of the devoted, right? So if the voted went from being 200,000 to, so it's the wrong question, right? It's not. So yes, the head of the AMA, and the AMA appoints the members of the RUC, right? So that manages how physicians get paid, and because they're never going to change how that works, we have a specially dominated rather than primary care dominated system, and you could imagine that could change. Brian Clapper was working with those guys in North Carolina who sued the RUC as a who sued the federal government as called the RUC, and so they had to open up the RUC and they lost, right? So the RUC is whoever that judge who turned it down was pretty damn influential. You could say are people keeping the same thing going, and so if you look at the heads of the big United, the heads of some of these really big systems like Sutter and what have you, who are going to keep doing what they do until there's a really, really good reason to stop. Then I think you could say they are the people who actually have the influence, right? And I would quibble with Michael because I think the government has such huge. You can take it out, but the government obviously has huge influence. But if you looked at someone like, I think the one that Oak, which is a big health fund, was pimping was they were pimping a number of startups, including Galileo, which is Tom Lee, and Devoted, which is the Park Brothers, and Maven, which is her name. What's her name?
Yeah, I know what you mean.
I'm embarrassed because I've met her and I think she's fantastic. Maven has 15 million employer lives which have access to it. So I don't know how many actual users they have. And full disclosure, I stuck $5,000 in a fund that put some money in Maven. So if it goes really well, I might do well. So all good for it. But at the moment, all of that stuff, right, as you just suggested, is creeping around the edges. Now, the question we never know is, and we spend hours and hours on this show and elsewhere and writing, is debating how much is any of that stuff going to change, and how much is it going to have influence on the rest of the system. And at some point, will the system flip over and we start getting our primary care or our care at home or whatever in a different way? But if you look at the overall part of it, all that money that went into digital health has been in general has been really struggling. Most of those companies continue to struggle. Even the ones that made it to public status are now, $1 to $2 to $3 to $4 to $5 billion market cap companies, not anywhere close to even a small health plan or a for-profit hospital, or what a non-profit hospital consortium would be worth if it was public and traded. And they're clearly not having the influence that you think they would. You think they might. Yeah. Now, if I was to go back a long time, I remember Institute for the Future with Ian Morrison and me and Ellen Morrison. We had a session a long time ago about sort of M&A and strategy and what have you, and who was going to be taking over the world of healthcare in the mid-90s. And at that point, the market caps of all the drug companies far exceeded any of the market caps of any of the insurers. And now, clearly, now we've had insurance consolidation. Obviously, United has grown the way it has, where United is much, much bigger than any one single drug company. So you could, had you done this list 30 years ago, you should be picking the outsiders coming are going to be the insurance conglomerates we have today, and eventually the conglomerating medical provider systems like the one in your neck of the woods, Michael, Advocate, which went up north and got the folks in Wisconsin and now is merging with the people from North Carolina. And anyway, and as I said, the other group is, who is managing their collections agencies, because they seem to have a big impact. Every couple of weeks, ProPublica has another article about.
But actually, in all seriousness, you would probably do a service writing something in the healthcare blog that called for this list to be modernized, as it were. Because modern healthcare, which many years ago, before I was involved, was called modern hospital, is still kind of out of those roots. And the answer is you can't compare it. If you're going to say who's most influential, leaving aside government for a moment, right? You can't compare a life sciences company to somebody changing a healthcare system operations company. It's apples and oranges. So what you would do is you would separate the life sciences, right? Somebody discovering a new drug is not the same thing as somebody, operating the largest Medicare Advantage program and changing all that. So you take the life sciences, take away government, you take life sciences, and you take, I don't know what you call what we all do, but you take healthcare system operations and you go, who is the most influential now? And then you could do things like what you said, who has the greatest potential, right? So somebody discovering a new drug that cures Alzheimer's, you can't compare to somebody discovering, a way to use AI so that all the notes are, immediately, they both be revolutionary, but in very different ways. And I think the healthcare blog would do a service by sort of calling out modern healthcare for being kind of intellectually lazy, as it were. Say, okay, let's, you're not modern hospital, and healthcare ain't just hospitals anymore, where the drug companies are these big sort of lumbering things. Let's modernize.
Yeah, I mean, but the candidate list, I can see how it happens, right? They get nominations, and a lot of the nominations, PR companies and the PR. If you're a thrusting venture-backed company, you're likely to have a PR person on staff who goes, let me find something to put the CEO up for, and that happens all the time. So it's not done in a very interesting way. And in fact, going back to my class last night, I actually was trying to help this group. So I'll tell you one more amusing thing. So I was trying to tell them about the current healthcare ecosystem, and I said, I explained to them, so here's why we pay fee for service. And I went back and did a quick aside on how Blue Cross got founded in the 30s in Texas, and over there. And then I said, there had been some conversation about Medicare and Medicare Advantage and Medicaid, and I explained a bit of that. And then I actually had a moment where I started feeling really freaking old, because I said, okay, so do you know where these came from? and just blank expressions. I think the oldest person in the room might be in their early 30s. They're not undergraduates, but they're maybe sort of ranging 25 to 40. Now, some of them are not from the US, so it's a little unfair, but nonetheless, they're still working professionals. So then I went, okay, well, it came as part of the Great Society, blah 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 blah, and then I just stopped a second, went, okay, do you guys know who the president was then? And the room went blank, and then I went, okay, so who was the president who got shot? They went, oh, Kennedy did that. So who was the president after that who won the election? No one in the room knew. A couple people said Nixon, and I said, well, no, it was this guy called LBJ Johnson. He was pretty powerful. He did a lot of amazing stuff. He passed this thing called the Great Society, which is a lot of the programs you know about. Then he had this other issue called the Vietnam War, which didn't go quite so well. You may have heard about that one, but it really brings to mind that when you have a bunch of people like us getting on to big old fogies, that I mean, I don't know if you can argue that these are people with college degrees, like in a graduate program, and they're obviously specialists in clinical work and healthcare. So I don't expect them to have the background of sort of policy and politics and history that some of us might. But it's pretty scary to think that a bunch of people, this stuff is really freaking ancient history. It's like asking us what happened in the 1910s and 1920s.
When I saw your tweet about going through the history of all that, I was reminded of my one of my favorite Blue Cross stories. So, I was 20 years on the commercial side before I went to a Blue Cross plan. And I kept having a hard time figuring out, how the different Blues plans interact, whatever. So I called this big meeting of all the people in the company, the people that had, national accounts, claims, all that kind of stuff. And I had them explain all the different ways we do it. And it turned out that nobody knew all the different ways that we did it with all their plans. Everybody knew their little piece of it. Nobody at Blue Cross knew all the ways that Blue Cross worked. So oh my God.
That's probably true for every corporation, every big organization, anywhere. I remember years ago when I was doing the 10-year forecast of healthcare Institute for the Future, somebody put together a meeting, which I was at, which was kind of all the old California legislators from the 60s and 70s explaining, what they've been involved with and what happened when Medicaid rolled out and the rest of it. And I remember, them talking about all these things that were great, and then all been derailed by Prop 13, right, which is the thing that changed property tax in California and meant that California went from spending number 1 in the nation on education to being number 47 or whatever we are now, and why everybody in California now has to write a check for their kids' school voluntarily, which I'm forced to do every year to make sure. Well, the people who can afford to do that, and why some schools look nice, and why. Apparently there hasn't been. I was just hearing from my chiropractor yesterday that there hasn't been any new school building in San Francisco since 1980. So, but I mean, putting aside all of that, right? I mean, it's just a long. It's just a long and tricky, thing to understand how these things work, how they played out. So all these legislators were decrying the fact that they put this stuff into place, and it was supposed to fix all these things around health and education and housing and stuff. And then one of them said, it was all great, it was all should have gone very well, and it was all derailed by Proposition 13, but it's our fault because we somehow allowed the idea that we were doing all this stuff and didn't bring the people along with us to be okay to pay all the taxes to do this stuff. And that's part of the reason why the
impact it had on the University of California system is just heartbranking.
It's extraordinary. I mean, it's now somebody was sharing. There was a very funny tweet shared around by Feng Trang, who has a very funny Twitter account, and he was looking at various things and what they cost back in the 1930s, I think. And I think a year at Harvard was $400. Then it was $420, and I actually tweeted back at him and I said, I suspect that Elon Musk must have been involved in the pricing of Harvard back then. And he went, actually, I'm sure it is, and he came up with some calculation about what that was in modern dollars, and yes, it ended in 69. So Elon Musk was definitely involved. But yeah, it is amazing how the things that cost a huge amount more, relatively speaking, in real terms now than what they did 50 years ago, include obviously anything to do with healthcare, anything to do with education, and now apparently concert tickets. which want to go see the Taylor Swift, it costs you $3,000. Want to sit at the back of the fake band imitating Queen, it's $400 as opposed to the £15 I spent when Freddie Mercury was actually still singing more. Anyway, it's
when I started as an underwriter, I think employee premiums were like $50 a month. I'm going to go back to the change in the influential was that Michael was talking about. Well, first, I think Michael should write that article.
Exactly. Why am I having to do it? Michael should write it. I'll publish it.
I think a good rule of thumb is anyone who has a PR person is not going to be on the list.
Everyone who has a PR, but the problem is everyone has a PR person. It's easy to be a PR person for a small startup, right? Because you have one CEO and trying to trust them. I work with a couple of PR companies. Actually, I do a consulting thing with one of them where I sort of do a sort of educational thing. Me and Just the Master doing an educational thing for them, and they've got a couple of big clients. So they have a bunch of small startups, types. They also have I think a big hospital system. I think they have CBS or they have something, and they're trying to figure out how, when you have several senior people at a company like that, and they have so much demand for their time, and they have to run their main business as well as talking about the future. Is that it's actually an interesting who do you put on them? They have PR people. The PR people, they probably have multiple PR people, and they're not sure who should be talking about what. It's back to the Blue Cross problem, right?
If they were doing a reported list as opposed to, which is, they're journalists, what you do is you go to people like the chief medical officer of CMS and other people and off the record, you go, who in the private sector is influencing you? Who has the most influence on government policy? And you go to the VCs and the PE guys and you go, who really is, we know that, Anderson Horowitz is not the same as whatever down the way, right? Who are the people? Because as we all know, many of the people who are the most influential operate in the shadows.
Oh, right? Well, there's that ProPublica article, right, where they dug in and found out about, because there was this one doctor who was so pissed that he kept on getting, he was being charged to receive the money by the insurance company. It had to come through this payment system, the charge or whatever. And they found out that there was one guy who had worked at CMS, now worked for that company, and was, and got them, was kind of deal with United and Cigna or whomever, and had gone back to CMS and said, take the wording down. There has to be free, so it doesn't have to be bank transfer. We can force them to use this thing, and everyone can take 3 cents on the dollar.
And by the way, right, if you get private sector, something that's in the healthcare blog versus on page 1 of the New York Times or the Washington Post, right?
I can't believe you would say that to me.
I was talking at the NICM meeting, right, with a old friend who works for NPR, right? And you can, do everything you want, and then something's on page 1 of the Times and it's news, right? And whether it was something from the Federal Register that came out, 3 months before or whatever, now it's on the news agenda. And so, who's the most influential? Well, it's whoever puts it on page 1 of the Times or the Post, right?
I'm not. That's interesting to me because it definitely used to be, right, when it was just paper. Now most people get their news electronically. I don't know what's the front page.
It still influences. It still gets picked up by the other news media, and it influences members of Congress. It's now obviously if it's something that if somebody at Fox News decides to make something their bête noire, that too. But if you're just reporting on something that's buried somewhere and saying, look what's happening with abortion, or look what's happening with, the kinds of things that we talk about, as opposed to, look, a new cancer drug was discovered, right? Everybody will see that. But when you start to talk about things that are buried in the bureaucracy, having it unearthed, because the Tucker Carlsons and the others of the world, they don't really unearth those kinds of things. They do sort of the big mega issues. And that's why, you can have the influence. Medicare Advantage costs. The fact that Berwick writes something in Health Affairs about it doesn't do it. The fact that it gets picked up and becomes then a topic does. So, and that's just the way it is. That's why people hire PR people and lobbyists, because they know how to have influence.
Try to get them there. Yeah, to me, it's tricky, and you have seen this. it is a different world than when there were 3 channels and there was the New York Times.
Right.
Yeah, but in those days, there were very influential local papers, right, which now have come most places have semi gone by the board, and now we have the whole rise of social media. And
although I will tell you a quick anecdote about local papers, since I was a reporter for the Chicago Tribune, and I remember hearing during the one of the health reform, the Clinton health reform debate. I went to somebody who was one of the trade groups, and he was talking to a meeting in Chicago, and he said, nobody writes about quality of care, blah, blah, blah. And I said, well, you know what? I sent you by mail back then the 3-part page 1 series I did. And I said, yeah, I know, but that doesn't really matter because it wasn't in the Washington Post or the New York Times. And the local papers had some influence, but again, the national papers, the national news, even more. And somewhat, it's not the same influence they used to have, but on certain issues, they still have the clout.
Local papers were great on reporting on local, like the article in California, this town where the people were making $700,000. Absent local papers, you don't find that stuff out because nobody's going to the meetings. And that's the great dirt that's happening. There are vast parts of the country that have no local reporting, really.
Right. Absolutely. I'm sure that all the ex-governors of Illinois who had been convicted of felonies and all the aldermen, that's probably why nobody bought the Chicago Tribune out from these PE guys who stripped it of all the reporters, because all the aldermen and all the state legislators said, no, get rid of those nasty reporters.
Michael, what's the Venn diagram on all the former governors of Illinois and all the former governors convicted of felony? That Venn diagram is pretty close.
Pretty tight. It's pretty close. Oh man. Okay, so now we are besmirching the fair state of Illinois as we come to the end of another episode of THCB Gang. Yeah, it's. I think. I mean, the question of influencing move stuff around it. That's obviously something that continues on. There's obviously been sociology and work on this forever, and Karl Marx has his opinions, all the rest of it. But it seems to me that the problem we have with healthcare that we don't have in other sectors, which is driving me nuts, is just how when you see things that are done better, and going back to what Topol was talking about, with AI comes in and it makes stuff more empathetic and whatever. Yeah, we'll have to see how it's done, but the bar you have to jump over to get new stuff to work better, especially this process that sort of helps the flow of how people get care and all the rest of it, is still so high compared to the stuff that's all been pre-trod, like, oh, we have the new drug, and this drug works better for obesity than the last drug, so that one we can bring that in, or for cancer.
It doesn't work. It doesn't work better. It works a little bit better, and it costs a lot more. So let's sell.
I think you could argue the Ozempics and Wegovys and what are the other ones called? The others work a lot better, right? I mean, we've had in the last few weeks the study that they reduce heart attacks by 20% as well, and do all this great stuff. And my friend who's taking it says that not only everybody sleeps a lot better because the inflammation is down, it makes you sleep better, and or takes some pains have gone away.
They also have a lot of side effects that have yet come to root.
Well, that's the other thing. So we haven't had, and what happens when you stop taking them? It's like you go on a diet, you go off the diet, right? You put the weight back on, and I think we'll find out. But I just can't get over the fact that if everybody who was notionally obese in this country took it, it would be 300.
Well, you could also
it would be about another $1 trillion.
You could also address the fact that you go to an airport and there's your muffin, which is 750 calories and everything. I mean, you could actually, for the amount of money you're spending, like address root causes, but that would be un-American.
Very un-American, because I will leave you with the fact that apparently not Newt Gingrich, somebody even worse, Ted Cruz, is appalled that the government wants to limit you to 2 beers a week, and he said they can kiss my ass. Although apparently alcohol is bad for you now. By the way, if you take a lot of if you take a Ozempic or Wegovy or whatever, Mounjaro, apparently you want to drink less alcohol too, which sounds like a very good reason to not take it, in my opinion. I'm not sure I get on. All right. We should get out of here. It's been great chatting with the two of you the last 2 hours. So, Michael, give me a sense about what you think is what are you looking for next? How are you spending?
Well, I think it's fascinating that we choose 10 drugs to do a little bit of price control.
How do we not mention that in the whole thing? The most important policy.
Yeah, not mentioned, which is pretty important. It's really a landmark thing. And of course, the Republicans chirp up with the drug company talking points that if you take away $1 from their 90% profit margin, they're going to stop discovering new drugs. And I think that that is not really good economics. There is a flat of the curve that says that at a certain point, no, they're taking that $1 does not really hurt innovation. And if you look at drug company pricing decisions, they're not done based on R&D. So many years ago, when every year pharma comes out with a number that says it costs on average $175 trillion to bring a drug to market. Look, that's where I asked them back years, over 2 decades ago, I said, okay, and what is the average time it takes to earn back that investment? And they said, we don't keep that number. And so, unfortunately, the economic illiteracy of most journalists is it doesn't matter. If I told you that you're going to have to give me $100,000 to develop a new drug and you'll get back your money in 2 weeks or 20 years, that's what matters, not the cost. And so tell me how long it takes for you guys to earn back that and what your average profit is. But alas, we still have too much economic literacy to ask that basic question. So we'll continue to.
And I will point out in that spirit, the spirit of R&D and innovation, the patent on Humira was supposed to expire in 2018.
Right.
All right.
No,
Kim.
There was a lot of legal innovation that went into
a lot of legal expenses and a lot of R&D costs for law firms. I'll give you that.
So the other thing about the drugs that was interesting. So on the one hand, the people are saying, oh, it's going to kill innovation. On the other hand, people are saying like, well, if you look at, the rebates and the net price of now, it's really not going to save really that much money. So you can't have it both ways. But the two things I learned this week that I thought are quite astounding is that by putting them on this list, they're automatically on the formulary plans, which is a huge win for consumers. And secondly, consumers in Medicare pay their coinsurance based on the list price. So not the net price. So that's going to automatically benefit consumers right away. So even if it doesn't save Medicare really any money, it's going to be much better for consumers, and they're not talking about that enough.
Yeah,
not heard that. That's great.
They go there, and there is part of it. There's a total cap, right, on out-of-pocket costs for drugs as well. As part of it as well.
That goes in 26, I think.
Okay, so I mean, part of this is that are they going to get that conversation out in front of seniors before the 24 election, or are we just going to have a mass of? I mean, the problem is it's going to be wall-to-wall coverage of craziness in the primaries and craziness of trials of Trump, and I don't know if we're going to hear from the Democrats. If they're going to get their word out edgeways in the next little bit.
So Kim, when these first the drug law was proposed that they're now all suing against, their stock prices did not go down because Wall Street said doesn't really mean that much. Did the stocks of all the companies go down?
No, they've priced it in already. It's
the only time the stock went down was when someone hacked Twitter and said that hacked Elon's account and said that they were going to cut the price of insulin. Their stock price went down, and we should all have bought it like tons because it's now gone up way since then.
Well, then it went back, and then they did cut it, and it didn't drop. So
that is true. Yeah. I think the Manjaro GLP-1 thing is the 10,000 year thing is what they're more interested in. The investors more interested in now.
As Matthew wanted to get a gang for the Thursday before Labor Day weekend, the only people who could get on were his Midwest correspondents. All the West Coast and East Coast people were too busy, but the Midwest people were there.
I think we have to leave it at that. I would like to thank my solid heartland, nice Midwestern contingent, Kim Bellard from Cincinnati, Michael Millenson from Chicago. We've talked everyone's ear off, had a great fun conversation. Some of it was about healthcare as well. I'll be back hopefully next week, the post Labor Day, with a much more serious gang where we'll talk about real issues. But hopefully have a few laughs, which will be, I think it's September the 6th. So I'm recruiting a new group for that. But look forward to that. For those of you who are on listening or catch us on the podcast, thanks all for listening. I'm Matthew Holt. This is THCB Gang for August the 31st, and we will be back soon. But thanks for taking time to hang out with us for an hour today.